the outcome was positive, but there still remains issues on trade and tariffs, so that matter will have to be resolved.
You know, there are going to be some extra tariffs, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere what he thought he was going to do. So at the end of the day, it'll be a normality again, but I think in the long run it'll work out fine.
I'm really disappointed to the president. He wasn't supposed to go to America because I don't think that there is anything that we need as the citizens in America.
$7 p.m. Sunday night. Happy Africa Day, everyone. It's Topical starts right now. Very good evening to you, South African, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical, a digital audience with us tonight. And as you know, this program is all about bringing the people with the answers to the people who want or need the answers. They will weigh in terms of some of the burning questions they have for our guests in a short while. Consequences, an act or instance of following something as an effect, result, or outcome. It's what tends to move the needle, right? Positive or negative. Is South Africa better or worse off after that meeting in the White House between President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Donald Trump? What are the political and economic consequences of this meeting? And as you know, consequences are in part a function of speed of process. In jest, someone described it as a romantic ambush with the dimming of the lights. You get the analogy. But more seriously, in terms of substance, you would agree there's an underlying reality that needs to be dealt with. Something that has touched almost each and every one of you watching in one way or another. What is that? Crime. Apart from the allegations, it was a strong theme of that meeting. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu said, and I quote, "We have respect for the United States of America as a country. We have respect for the people in that country and for President Trump, but we have no respect for this genocide story at all. It is totally unfounded and unsubstantiated." End of quote. So, where does this leave South Africa's political and trade relationship with the United States? What's the way forward? Key. We will discuss with the better minds of the program shortly. Which leads us to the question of the week, and we're asking you, what hopes or changes do you see emerging from South Africa after President Ramaphosa's high-stakes meeting with President Trump? Let us know at SABC News_TV. Let's walk and talk, get you some context. What was it like to be in that room? The Trade Industry Competitions Minister at Parks Tower joining us on the program. We're going to try to get you some answers on that. We would love to hear your thoughts as well at SABC News_TV. Perspective coming up. All right, let's tee up the discussions for you. What we know and why it matters. Our U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joins me now live to make sense of it all. Sherwin, good to have you on the program. Good to see you. Look, a lot of fact-checking is needed, right? Where do we start? The white genocide claims. Reportedly, President Trump showed a screenshot of a Reuters video taken in the Democratic Republic of Congo as part of what he presented as evidence of mass killings of white South Africans. So how have these claims, Sherwin, resonated days after that meeting?
I'll tell you, the U.S. media, Blaine, has been all over it. Over this, they have debunked the video. They have debunked the Reuters photo from the DRC Congo, which represented, I believe, the aftermath of a fight between the DRC armed forces and the M23-backed Rwandan rebels in that country. And so lots of misinformation here. There has been questions put to the White House press secretary, Carolyn Levitt. She was asked by the the NBC correspondent at the White House what sort of protocols were in place in terms of vetting information, unsubstantiated information that they put out there. The question then was thrown back at her, what is unsubstantiated about the video? The video shows crosses that represent the dead bodies of people who were racially persecuted by the government, right? And of course, as we now know, that was a memorial after the killing of Glenn and Vida Rafferty in KwaZulu-Natal, done by their son and the community, that sought to highlight farm murders that have happened across South Africa over a long period of time. Certainly doesn't speak to the racially motivated genocide claims that have been emanating from the White House. But I will say that in terms of the traditional media houses in the United States, and including the more conservative-leaning broadcasters, your Breitbarts and your Foxes, they've been very fair in identifying the falsehoods and really sort of explaining what really transpired in that meeting without asserting or confirming what the US president had put out there.
Showing President Trump turning some of his meetings into moments of public hostility, right? Using visual aids, props of sorts being used. Political theater is how some have described it. Is this what leaders now expect when going to the White House?
Well, you talk about what was the context, providing context to our viewers. Here's a bit of context. When two principals or presidents meet in a traditional sense, the two teams vet what the high-level meeting is going to look like. They discuss at length the program, what will be discussed, the agenda, the timing of everything. And we had received guidance from the White House saying they would meet at the door, there would be a handshake, they would then go in for a signing of the visitor's book, they would then go into a closed session over lunch to discuss their issues or whatever was on the table, and then go into the public fora in the White House. Soon after that handshake, we were suddenly told as press out there, get into the Oval Office right now. They're going straight into the open public session. So things that would have been ventilated in private, maybe even addressed in private, and then you kind of show a united front going out, completely goes out the window. So it's difficult for us not to say that there is a political, theatrical element to this. I have to speak to my constituency, I have to show them how tough I was, and then we'll make nice afterwards. Because when we spoke to the South African president thereafter, the clear message was we were able to have substantial conversations, including about golf, but also substantial conversations about trade. We heard that the South African Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, whom you'll speak to, talked about a new trade and investment framework. Right. So there was substance there, but certainly playing to the cameras before that meeting took place.
President Trump's allies applauded the confrontation online, seeing it as another example of the president, I guess, holding world leaders accountable. Talk to us about the balance that has been struck, Show, and you mentioned it earlier on the coverage of the more salient points that came out of this meeting.
We can get to that in just a moment. Understand also the balance that President Ramaphosa was trying to achieve in that meeting. To not push back harder was certainly the intention of the South African delegation. Yeah. Do not ruffle President Trump's feathers any further, because that doesn't go well. What did the Zelensky meeting teach other delegations, right? Do not push back too hard in public, because that then just creates more problems down the line. They came there with the clear intent of wanting to get beyond the genocide, ethnic cleansing claims, to get to the substance. What did South Africa go there for? To reset the relationship, to move the relationship forward, to talk about this important economic relationship, be that within the framework of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, but then also, if necessary, if AGOA is not renewed come September later this year, that they've got something in their back pocket. And I'm sure Parks Tau is going to be able to illuminate what that discussion was in terms of the substance. But the balance, I think, was South Africa leaving here with potential to talk more, US more engaged in the G20. That's what balance looks like for South Africa. It's not necessarily split down the middle.
Some commentators will say, look at what Trump does, not what he says. But sometimes the reality is that it's all fine until it's not. The sense that you got from the delegation that was present there in the United States, did you get a sense that it was measured in terms of what plan they had going in versus the outcome?
Look, I think South Africa will say that they achieved what they wanted to say, what they wanted to do. But I think there will also be some groups in South Africa, some conservative-leaning groups, the ones that have been lobbying the White House for a more aggressive posture towards South Africa, that will be very happy. They felt that the president of South Africa was embarrassed, put on the spot, and that kind of theater plays into the narrative that white people writ large are being persecuted in South Africa. But certainly, I think the objective of the South African delegation was not to make this any worse, Blaine, and I don't think there's any question that they didn't make it worse. To the extent to which they've maybe made it better remains to be seen.
All right, we'll take it further in a short while. SABC US correspondent Shaun Bryce Peace, appreciate the context, sir. Thank you. Just as some of the comments that we're getting in terms of the conservative sites that we've scanned, and this expo says Trump bringing receipts actually gave me chills. What a leader, MAGA, make America great again. That's what that stands for. The next one goes on to say, thank you, President Trump, for holding him accountable. This is one of the greatest moments ever. Some of the sentiments, again, this ex-post goes on to say, yes, I am a South African and I love this. Mr. President of SA, I hope this rocks you to the core. That is some of the sentiment that you heard online in terms of the more conservative sites. But on the flip side, those saw President Ramaphosa as measured, statesman, and got the message across. He kept on hammering as to why they were there, the reset. So what does a reset mean in the greater scheme of things? How does it look practically? What sort of deals have been achieved? How close are we to signing these deals? We've got the better minds, as I said, on the program. We're going to get some answers for you in a short while. But we would love to hear your thoughts as well. Word on the Street feature. We took to various streets seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic, and this is what people had to say. Watch.
Still remains issues on trade and tariffs, so that matter will have to be resolved, because it was a comfortable conversation. It got uncomfortable, but they didn't really deal with the economic issues and they didn't really deal with the business issues. It was more about the political landscape.
Remember, before our President Cyril Ramaphosa went to US, he did mention that we don't need anything from Americans, from the Western side, which was true. And then Trump again, he said some sanctions against South Africa. So and then now, out of nowhere, we need something from America. What is it that we need? We don't need anything from America.
Having these white men going out there to represent us might not be a true reflection of who we are as a country, and that is a bit concerning.
I think we are, there are going to be some extra tariffs, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere what he thought he was going to do. So at the end of the day, it'll be a normality again, but I think in the long run it'll work out fine. But let's see, only time will tell.
I think probably behind closed doors there's been some good discussions. I think he had the right team behind him, and as long as he's got the information to provide the correct discussions points, I think we could get some positivity out of that outcome.
The most important part is getting trade and economic benefit for our country. We need to get more investment and help infrastructure in our country. I hope behind those closed doors meeting it really helped.
Relationship had seemingly gone sour, but I think with what was able to be achieved now, they were able to be on the same page to some degree, and I think it sets the tone for going forward to improve the relations between South Africa and the US.
All right, so we'd really appreciate your thoughts on this. Let's get the discussion on the road. We've lined up a number of guests in order to give you better context, give you the way forward. What is the way forward post that meeting? We're over the meeting now. What is at the other end of the equal sign, so to speak? Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition, Parks Tau, is our special guest tonight. Thank you, sir, for joining us. We also have Shaun Jacobs, is a Professor of International Affairs at the New School. Shaun, thank you very much indeed for your time. Our digital audience as well, please raise your virtual hand for your questions for the Minister as well as Sean, and we'll do my very best to get you on air. Minister Tau, thank you for making the time once again. Reset, that was the objective. Days after, once things have settled, do you think we have achieved that as Team South Africa?
Thank you very much and good evening. Firstly, let me say that we had set ourselves a clear set of objectives. And the first of those objectives was to normalize the relationship between the US and South Africa. Part of our reality is that over the past few months, we've experienced statements and comments from the US that suggest that the relationship has pretty much reached rock bottom, if you like, and we thought it's important that we reset that relationship, that we're able to create a basis on which we're able to engage as the two countries. So from that point of view, I think we've achieved our objective. The second was in relation to the trade and investment relationships. We went out to say we're going to the US to present a South African proposal around trade and investment. Right. We presented that proposal. They indicated appetite to engage on that proposal. So from that point of view, I'm also encouraged about the outcomes of our discussions.
I assume that reset is a process, not an event. Having said that, in terms of your objectives and following that meeting, what are some of the trade deals in the pipeline, sir, that will benefit South Africa?
Well, in terms of the proposals that we put forward, we indicated that in our view, it is important that it is a mutually beneficial relationship, that we're able to look at trade and investment from the point of view of our respective countries, and our proposals related to exactly that. So we looked at a number of areas. The first is the revival of the trade and investment framework agreement that we had with the US and the implementation of that. And within the context of the trade and investment framework agreement, what are the critical issues that we need to pursue? Amongst others, we indicated that, of course, the US has raised concerns about the balance of trade-related issues, and we said, it's okay, we are prepared to procure certain products from the US that we need as a country. So liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is one of those areas where we are on the brink of a gas cliff, if you like, in the next year or two, and the US has huge supplies of gas. So we said we as a country are prepared and ready to buy gas from yourselves, and we think that we can engage in that. In as much as we said from a trade point of view, we would want to continue selling vehicles to the US duty-free, as we've historically done, and we said at least 40,000 units of vehicles sold into the US needs to be duty-free. So we've put those sort of issues on the table. And as I said, it's about a mutually beneficial relationship. So it is a give and take. We said, this is what we're prepared to buy from you, and this is what we would want to sell from you, and these are the circumstances, and all those issues are currently on the table.
I just want to drill down on a couple of points. The import of liquefied natural gas from the United States. Writing in the Sunday Times today, Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni said that South Africa will import 75 to 100 petajoules of liquefied natural gas from the US for 10 years. What can South Africa expect in return?
Well, as I said, part of what we put in return is the possibility or the proposal that we should be able to sell automotive products, in particular motor vehicles, into the U.S. market, duty-free, quota-free into the U.S. market, which would be, as we presented to them, 40,000 units of those vehicles sold into the U.S. So there are various of these products that we've put on the table that we've said we would want to sell to you in as much as we would want to buy from you.
How does this marry, though, Minister, with what some have seen as the realities on the ground? The reports of a major global automotive manufacturer allegedly considering the possibility of closing down plants, not only in South Africa, but India and Argentina as part of their global turnaround. How does that marry with regards to what's coming from the United States?
We ourselves as a country and as a department are actively looking at how do we re-energize our automotive sector. Part of our reality is that you're seeing changes in demand in the automotive industry. So you're seeing more appetite for larger vehicles. So people are no longer buying passenger vehicles. They tend to buy larger vehicles. We're also seeing appetite for liquid, or rather, alternative energy into the automotive sector. So the industry is undergoing a significant shift in terms of both demand, but also in terms of the sort of energy that would be used in the industry. And we reposition ourselves in that regard. That doesn't mean that we don't intend to continue trading in the automotive sector. We certainly do want to continue. We have positioned ourselves as the leading automotive manufacturer on the continent that has, to a large extent, an export orientation. And that export orientation is into markets into the EU, into the continent, but also into the US. And we need to be able to nurture and sustain those partners that we sell into.
So various avenues of opportunity created after that meeting in the United States. Anything signed yet, Minister?
Anything?
That's signed yet? Any deals that have been signed yet?
Not yet. We presented our proposal to the U.S. We met with the United States Trade Representative on Monday. We presented a set of proposals about what could constitute a mutually beneficial partnership. They gave us feedback. We revised our proposal. We resubmitted on Tuesday, and they indicated that they would be going through their own processes and would revert. I should say that by the time we left on Friday, our team in the trade branch in our department had a discussion with the U.S. About what the way forward is, and I'm awaiting confirmation as to what those discussions entailed and what the way forward should be. But the point I want to emphasize is that the U.S. did indicate, both in our engagements with the trade representative, but also in our engagements at the White House, an appetite to continue to engage with South Africa and to find solutions to our trade and investment relationships.
Professor Sean Jacobs, how would you interpret the political as well as economic consequences of this meeting? If you can unmute, sir.
I knew I was going to be the one. I knew I was going to be the one to create that technical problem. I mean, I think overall the performance globally, if you're outside South Africa, the overall perception of President Ramaphosa's performance is positive. I mean, he went into a situation in which he had no control of it. As Cyril said earlier, President Trump has changed the rules of these state visits. So you go in, you're surprised. He pulls out props. He turns it into a performance for his base in the U.S. And South Africa is basically like a red flag in the sort of global politics around kind of the white right, around conservative politics, in which South Africa presents sort of this fantasy of what would happen to you if you institute DEI, diversity, inclusion, equality, and it would lead to something like this. So what happened was President Ramaphosa did well, remained calm. He showed, he was dignified. He was, I think, as people have pointed out, the restraint. It showed a certain kind of skill, which if you're familiar with South African politics, like all of us here are, he has a history of acting in that way. I think at the end of it, I saw a statement where he was being referred to as a statesman. And just to Minister Tau's comment, your question to Minister Tau saying like what deals came out of it. I mean, if you're going into a meeting where the intent of your host is to embarrass you with false information, as been pointed out, I don't think there's any chance for you to counter this kind of information. I also think at some level, as one of the Vox Pops on the street pointed out, maybe one mistake that was made was in this kind of overemphasis on white South African opinion, white South African anxiety. I think that is a problem that I think maybe that's one of the issues that we should address, because these are the things that become red herrings. Kill the Boer, or the Boer is now apparently back in conversation inside in South Africa when it's been settled by the courts. So for me, overall, I think President Ramaphosa did really well. He was dignified. He came away from a situation in which many other leaders did not perform at the level that he did.
Yeah. The big talk now, Minister Tau, would be the African Growth and Opportunity Act. But you would agree that these tariffs coming from the United States have technically nullified AGOA. One would assume that these negotiations to renew AGOA are going to be tough. Understatement, I guess. But if AGOA is terminated, Minister, what's plan B for South Africa?
Well, firstly, it's a mixed bag. So AGOA currently is still applicable. So the tariffs that have been imposed are on top of AGOA tariff relationship. So it means that you're adding, let's say in the automotive sector, 25% on a zero base, as opposed to 25% of, let's say, a 10%. So and that's why I'm saying it's a mixed bag in relation to AGOA. I think it's important, and we've said this to the US. In our proposal, we've said we are continuing to lobby for the reauthorization of AGOA. Of course, this has to do with a collective approach that we take as the countries that benefit from AGOA. So we think that it should be reauthorized, and there's value to do that, not just for South Africa. Yeah. The reality is that South Africa is the highest utilizer of AGOA benefits, but that extends beyond South Africa. That extends to countries that supply certain products into the sectors that supply into AGOA. So when you look at a vehicle that gets out of South Africa, it gets harnesses from a different part of the continent, it gets wheels and tires from a different part of the continent. So there's linkages to the benefits of AGOA. So we think that we should continue to lobby for it until such time that the US says it is completely cancelled. And at this point, they haven't said so.
Francois van der Merwe, looking from afar, they seemingly, in terms of the economics of this, positives. The political aspect of it, what you saw in that meeting, how do you read it? How did you interpret it?
I think it was laughable to see the president and his entourage laughing at the heinous video that was played by President Trump. I think it was he showed a total disregard for the plight of our people, for the reality of many farmers in South Africa. And his token white guys, he took with, Trump isn't stupid, he looked right through it. And, I think there was just a total lack of responsibility for the problems in this country from President Cyril Ramaphosa. And I felt deeply offended by the way they acted.
In terms of the allegations, the white genocide that President Trump kept on mentioning, I was listening to Ronald Lamola on an international broadcaster saying that in the last 4 years there was 225 farm attacks, 101 farm dwellers who are majority black, 55 farm owners who are majority white. Does that represent genocide to you, Francois?
Firstly, with all due respect, your statistics is not correct. It is much more
this is
than that.
According to Ronald Lamola, by the way, yeah.
Yeah, but like I said, it's about between 40 and 50 a year, almost for the last 30 years. Some years have been much more than that even. If you look by the ratio between commercial farmers in this country and amount of farmers, white farmers that have been murdered, it is statistically the highest group that are being killed in this country. And we as a group have the right and I believe the duty to show this out and to emphasize the significance of the killing of white farmers in South Africa. Of course, when there's only 10 people in a certain, let's say there's just 10 judges on the Supreme Court and there's 2 of them murdered, now you can say, but it's only 2 of the Supreme Court justices that have been killed, and while the rest of the country there's 20,000 being killed. But per capita, for the ratio between commercial farmers and the murders on white farmers, it is twice as high as even the number of per ratio as the police killings in this country.
Look, the killing of farmers is deeply sad. It's heartbreaking. It's unacceptable. But the same goes for any other person, one would argue. One person killed is one too many. Moletela, your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, with all due respect to Francois, I think, he's giving us more false information. The same disinformation that we're trying to run away from, he's busy peddling it. I mean, just last week, there were stats that were released to speak about the false news that has been spreading. So we can't have on a national broadcaster someone telling us about statistics that he does not have, he can't substantiate. He's just telling us about numbers. But let me move away from that and speak about what I had hoped to hear from our president and the delegation. So the first thing I wanted to hear was, how are we going to benefit? How are we going to leverage our precious metals? Because we have precious metals and rare earth minerals here in the country, which make up 56.6% of the commodities that the US uses and they import from South Africa.
Yeah.
So we're speaking about chromium, manganese, and vanadium. So how is the South African government then going to sort of leverage that and say, look, if you guys are saying that we must reset our relationship, why must we reset it on a certain term and not where it's going to be beneficial, mutually beneficial? Because we cannot be seen as big as South Africa.
Let me throw that.
We do have the reasons.
Let me throw that question to Minister Tau. Go on. All right, yeah. Minister Tau, I mean, South Africa is no doubt an important minerals provider of minerals critical to the United States supply chain. How would you respond to Moletelo?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to comment on the points that Francois raised. I do think that part of the reality is the posture that has been taken is polarizing South Africa. I think that, in fact, in a country where we're seeking to build national unity, in a country that seeks to resolve its problems, to isolate a particular group in this country as being persecuted against the reality of our daily experiences in South Africa is quite unfortunate. So I do think that we need to encourage those in our country that continue to peddle these messages to worry about the levels of polarization that this causes in the country. And we're currently experiencing it. I mean, you're getting messages from people that say, but we can't continue to tolerate this. We can't continue to be accused by people who know the reality, who know the truth. And they can't continue saying these things to the rest of the world as if there is genocide and persecution and not confront it. But that's a reality that we need to confront as a people and a country. So I thought it's important to raise that because Francois and those that argue like him should take responsibility for the levels of polarization that their posture is impacting on the country. Now, coming back to the point that's raised by Moletelo, we did put a proposal forward, and part of what we said to the US is, look, we provide 12 of your 50 critical minerals into the US. 9 of those, we're the bulk provider, we're the largest provider of those minerals into your country. We're ready and prepared to work with you for the continued import of those products with a particular approach that ensures that we're able to beneficiate in the country, have industrialization in the country, whilst at the same time we acknowledge that advanced manufacturing would happen in the US. And that discussion from what we've heard has been positively received and is part of the issues that we'd be pursuing.
Professor Jacobs, you have your hand up. You want to jump in?
I mean, I wanted to just quickly say, just to directly respond to some of the claims that Francois made. I mean, I think it's easy for some of us to kind of laugh at because it sounds so ridiculous. But I think it's important to note that the reason we got to Washington and the damage that was done to South Africa is because that information was taken seriously by the US government. That kind of misinformation, and then was amplified by Elon Musk on his X platform. And we've also learned in the process, and I think the minister's alluding to this, that it's easy just to say we're going to debunk this, but in a way we're bringing like a knife to a gunfight, which is the South African institutions, I think, we need to rethink about how do we deal and how do we counter and how do we regulate or manage disinformation in South Africa, because it then gets amplified on global tech platforms, not just by ordinary people, but by high-tech billionaires, by media houses. Well, X is a media house, and I think it has consequences for us, for South Africa. I mean, I'm also South African. It has consequences for the country globally and for the country's future, for our ability to grow the economy. All these questions that, Molatella and others are bringing up.
All right, we need to take a quick break. Still lots more to discuss with regards to the outcomes of that meeting. We're taking the story forward. What does the future hold post that meeting for South Africa? More questions from our digital audience. Next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. Question of the week, and we ask you, what sort of changes, what do you hope will come out of that meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa as well as US President Donald Trump? High stakes meeting, no doubt. You heard what Minister Parks Tower said. What sort of deals are in the pipeline? What sort of avenues of opportunity are in the pipeline for South Africa in terms of investment, liquefied natural gas, etc., etc.? Let's go to our digital audience. Questions for our guests. Kostas, let's hear from you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Blaine, and good evening to the guests. Now, I've got just one question, two questions to one Minister Tau, but also just as a comment. Here's a question to Minister Tau. When AfriForum started this madness in 2018, they should have nipped it in the bud. And you see where it is now. It's out of control. Still, the government of South Africa has not thought of a way on nipping this thing in the bud. Professor Samgetele Brandt years ago once said that the sovereignty of this country is under threat, not from black people, but from the right-wingers. Now, they've demonstrated their threat to our sovereignty, and our government is still sleeping on the job. So here's a question, Mr. Tau. You have let this thing get out of control. What do you intend to do to nip this thing in the bud and bring it to an end once and for all? Second question, you go to the US to sign a deal of LNG. For heaven's sake, we are surrounded by billions and billions of natural gas beneath the ocean floor. So what's going to happen? This is energy security you are playing around here. You are exporting it to a country that is unstable, United States. So if 5 years from now decide they no longer want to have a relationship with us, for instance, so we are stuck with no energy security, why would you take a national security matter and export it to America when in fact we could be drilling our own crude around our shores of the ocean, right, where we make sure one we are secured? Why would you do that? That's the question. Thank you.
Minister, your response?
Well, firstly, let me say that we have gone to some lengths to debunk a lot of the theory about genocide and the messaging that has been peddled by the likes of AfriForum, etc. Of course, in many instances, messages don't always get across, particularly when audiences are either not listening or audiences are not concentrating on the issue. So I'm not going to pretend like we have not been concerned about the issue, about the messaging that has taken place, and have sought to respond to that. But our reality is that we need to increase our messaging. And part of what happened on Wednesday is about increasing our messaging. The feedback that we're getting from across the world is an acknowledgement that, in fact, part of what was being said at the White House is not reflective of the reality of South Africa, and that there is a responsibility to verify a lot of the information that's being peddled. But I think that the point that's being raised is very important about, can we continue to explore our own resources? Can we continue to increase our capability to invest in this regard? And I can say that if you look at the strategy that's currently adopted by government, it is about increasing our ability to invest, to explore, and to to research in terms of our resources and capability and bring in the appropriate technologies that are able to increase our capacity to exploit the resources that we have. So, Kustas, I fully agree with you. We need to ensure that we're able to maximize the value that we can extract from the resources that we have. But that must be premised on the reality that we can't continue in the direction of extracting resources and selling them on. It must be that we extract them, that we beneficiate, that we industrialize, so that we're able to grow our economy. And there are significant shifts that we're making as government to be able to achieve that. There are pronouncements that we want to make fairly soon with colleague ministers about chrome and ferrochrome as an example, about our ability to beneficiate into ferrochrome and to ensure that we're able to extract more value from our chrome resources as a country. So there are deliberate efforts that we're taking, but I'm not going to pretend like we haven't experienced deindustrialization as a result of the limitations that we have had in terms of beneficiation of our resources. Thank you.
Let's take more questions from our digital audience. Angela, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Blaine. I'd just like to circle back to the trade relations. Yes, we understand that the goal of the meeting was to re-establish dialogue. While that's important, it's not sufficient, and South Africa should definitely move beyond diplomatic optics and actually maximize on other opportunities, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area. And my question to the minister is, yes, we understand that we need to continue to lobby for AGOA, which is important, but is there an actual trade strategy in place to reposition South Africa should it not continue? And does this trade strategy account for whatever AGOA would take from South Africa? Thank you.
Minister?
Well, thank you very much, Angela. Firstly, to say both our economic diplomacy strategy and our export strategy and industrialization are linked to an approach that says the anchor partners are Africa. The implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is at the center of what should drive us. And that should inform the way in which we invest in infrastructure, the way in which we develop our policies and mechanisms of implementation, the way in which we partner with our sister countries. And we've invested a lot of time and energy, both at the level of the AFCFTA. We were recently at a Council of Ministers in Kinshasa talking about, one, how do we respond to the AGOA challenges, but how do we accelerate implementation of the AFCFTA? And as a country, we are taking a greater, or rather, more aggressive positions with regards to how we continue to trade and invest with our sister countries on the continent. That's not to the exclusion of the rest of the world, but we're saying South Africa's economy is going to prosper at the back of its partnership with our sister countries. And as we do that, we need to ensure that it's not just beneficial to South Africa, but it's also beneficial to our sister countries, so that you don't have a situation where our neighbors and sister countries say, but you are the most industrialized country and you benefiting alone. We must be able to benefit together. And I can reassure you that if you look at our diary, our program, our efforts, we're spending a lot of time on the work that needs to be done on the continent.
Right. Sean Jacobs, you want to weigh in?
I mean, I think for me, in general, I think the challenge, and this is the question that everybody wants to know, like, what happens now? For me, I think, yes, we have to have a partnership with the United States in some way or other. But Angela is correct. This is a moment for South Africa to look for other relations, to end this dependence on exploitative Western partnerships, and deepen, for me, those relationships across the global south. Mexico, Brazil, Malaysia, the BRICS. I know the BRICS aren't perfect. It's a forum. It's a place where you can start discussion. We can debate as to whether the South African government has the appetite for it. We can debate as to whether the South African public understands the need for moving away from the West. But I think it's already, I mean, it's very clear. The minister mentions our African partners, but even beyond that, I mean, we should debate the relationship with China, with the European Union, with Mercosur, with India, Southeast Asia, with, for me, the Middle East. You know, there's also Japan and South Korea. So I know the minister has all these details about this. I'm not assuming the South African government isn't doing that, but I think the South African needs to begin to prioritize these other kind of relations to have a more diversified way to think about trade and economic relations.
And reportedly, Donald Trump is threatening 50% tariffs on the European Union, so they might be shopping for other partners as well. Let's get more questions. Luke Riley first, and then Paul. Luke.
Thank you, Blaine. My question is for Mr. van der Merwe. In regards to the meeting, with the president and then President Trump, do we not perhaps have a situation where, this issue of farm murders has, it's got the ear of the U.S. president? This is a huge opportunity to raise this issue, but is it not a bit of a situation with the dog that's grabbed its own tail? I mean, practically with what has been done to address this issue of farm murders, we've got no concrete U.S. action from this. Sure, the controversy has been raised, but of the actions President Trump has taken, we've got tariffs on the South African economy, which have been paused, and then freezing PEPFAR. Now, there's also the granting of asylum to some Afrikaners, but there are 2.5 million Afrikaners in this country. 8,000 applied to leave, 50 have gone. The practical benefit of helping, white South African Afrikaners here in the country hasn't really been applied, and I'd say they've honestly been more hurt by Donald Trump's policies. 30% tariffs affects white South African Afrikaners just as much as everyone else. Freezing PEPFAR aid, it's not as though Afrikaners are immune to HIV/AIDS. Are we not having a situation where, sure, this issue has been raised, even putting aside the white genocide claim, we have farm murders in this country. This has been raised to the White House. But what this has done beyond political rhetoric from Mr. Trump, nothing much is actually being done for white Afrikaners in this country by the Americans.
Look, let me give Francois a chance to respond to that. We're fast running out of time. Francois?
Look, I believe your question is very valid, and I think we will see now whether the American government is sincere in their calling on this ongoing or steps to a genocide of our people. And I believe that, like I said, I think we'll see now whether they are serious and sincere on helping us. I don't believe we can already say there's nothing that's going to be done. I believe that the pressure that has been put on the government, the fact that it has become a worldwide issue now, and that finally the truth has come out, the fact that there is some, maybe like the picture you showed of the crosses next to the road, where you can say there was an incident for certain farmers that was killed. Then I can say there's the White Cross Monument, which is a very, very prominent symbol of farmers all around the world. And I believe the first step to change is awareness. And that is what Trump has done for us. He has put this on the map. He has put our question on the map. And hopefully does not just stop at farmers. Hopefully BE can be talked about. Maybe the 140 race laws that has been implemented against our people can be talked about. Hopefully the Bala bill, which seeks to undermine our schools or language in schools, maybe hopefully the Expropriation Act, which will disproportionately affect I believe white Afrikaners. I believe this is just the first step. Sorry, just one last thing. For too long this government has been unaccountable. They have been politically untouchable because they were the revolutionaries in South Africa. But finally, it has changed, and now there's consequences for their action, and they can't stand it.
I have to give a right of reply. I know my director is shouting at me to wrap it up, but Parks Tau, just to respond to that and wrap it up, please, in 30 seconds.
Well, firstly, let me say that it would be a travesty in this country if we were to stop the process of affirming those people historically disadvantaged. Black people were oppressed. They continue to face difficulties as this country. In fact, if Francois wants to take it to its logical conclusion, how many black people are dying at the hands of white farmers? But we don't make that an issue in this country. We say it's a problem of crime. It's a problem that we need to deal with. But if you want to polarize this country, you're taking us down a dark hole, and you've already taken us there. And please help this country move forward, not move backward.
All right, Pakstow, thank you so much indeed for your time, Minister. Sean Jacobs, Professor, thank you so much as well, value added. Mpho Zipazonke, I do apologize. You're going to come back next week. We'll try to get your questions first up. I'm so sorry that we couldn't take it, but thank you very much indeed, all of you, for your contributions. All right, before we go, here's my take. Look, whether you left or right wing, whether you're from the east or west wing, or whether you're running on a wing in a standing up for what is right should always be the goal, right? Equally so, facts and context matter in informing what is right and what is wrong. And these facts are often only useful in the context of humanity. Truth is not neutral. Veteran journalist Carl Bernstein said that. This was the line he was taught by great reporters covering civil rights. Does that line resonate with you? It doesn't have to be that it doesn't have to be fair, right? Fairness is important. But perhaps it's time to replace talking about each other with talking to each other. And this will hopefully lead to a better understanding about each other. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, then be sure to watch this episode of Topical on YouTube, as well as SABC Plus. If you watch a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Stand by for a special edition of Unwrapped Africa. Next up, you don't want to miss it. Thembekile is up next. Take care. Bye-bye.